magkaputol-putol because of connections. Okay, but nonetheless, welcome again to the discussion for bad debts or doubtful accounts. This is actually a continuation with our discussion with accounts receivable a year ago. 1 year ago. 1 year ago kasi nga, 2022 na ngayon, 2021 last year, so 1 year ago. Kasi sa December pa lang naman yun. Okay, joke lang. Sige, proceed tayo sa ating discussion. Bad debts or doubtful accounts. Our focus points for this discussion is to discuss bad debts or doubtful accounts. We can either use bad debts or doubtful accounts, they're just the same. Then discuss write-off and recovery of accounts previously written off. If time still allow us, we can discuss write-off and recovery. Then we have the sample problems. Now, in connection with our discussion, way back in accounts receivable, I've made examples that sometimes utang or credit to customers, sometimes hindi yan nababayaran. They are subject to doubt as to payment. With that scenario, bad debts or doubtful accounts may arise. Ba yung example ko na yung merong mga sari-sari store dyan, sa inyo umuutang, sa iba, bumibili pag merong pera. Ha? But it doesn't mean na hindi naman magbabayad yung customers sa inyo. But there is a doubt of non-payment. So let us start with bad debts or doubtful accounts, discussing bad debts or doubtful accounts. So what is a bad debt? Bad debt is more than just being uncollectible as regards to the concept that you have learned under your backsen. So bad debt in connection mismo with accounting, bad debt or doubtful account is an expense. On the part of a company that incurs such expense, it is a non-cash expense. When we say non-cash, walang cash na kaakibat. You are not paying something out of cash, but you are incurring something, a non-cash expense. Bad debt and doubtful accounts are actually a loss on the part of the entity in the form of an expense account. Now, a company recognized as such in connection with its receivables, commonly yung accounts receivable natin. Because of all the receivables, accounts receivable yung less secured. Aside from the billing that we have, all other securities are not present to accounts receivable. Okay? I hope you can still remember our discussion with accounts receivable. Now, being a financial asset, under IFRS 9, it is subject to impairment. The impairment of accounts receivable could be associated with the recognition of bad debt and doubtful account. Under IFRS 9, what is provided there is expected credit losses. Expected credit losses, the example of terminologies that we can emphasize for purposes of impairment for accounts receivable is the bad debt and doubtful account. I did not make use of the term expected credit losses and allowance for expected credit losses under PFRS 9 because it's very technical on your part. Although I made research for reconciliation of the terms that I'm going to use for purposes of bad debt and doubtful accounts for accounts receivable. But yun nga, under IFRS 9, expected credit losses associated sa kanya is yung bad debt and doubtful accounts expense. Then allowance for doubtful accounts or allowance for bad debts, under IFRS 9, allowance for expected credit loss naman yung term. Okay, but they are just the same as to concept. Yun nga lang, yung terminology under IFRS 9 is really on the entire financial instrument, particularly on financial asset. In fact, accounts receivable is a financial asset. Being a financial asset, it could be subjected to impairment. And impairment, example for accounts receivable, yan, recognition of bad debt and doubtful accounts. So it's in the form of loss account, an expense amount, recognized in relation to receivables that turned out to be doubtful for collections or simply put, uncollectible. If you can still remember in your Baaksen, sa basics of journal entries under sole proprietorship, pinapag-journal entry kayo, usual journal entry dyan is to recognize debit expense and credit allowance. So debit, doubtful accounts expense, and credit allowance for doubtful accounts. That is, yung assumption kasi doon is allowance method. But later on, we have methods in presenting bad debts and doubtful accounts in the financial statements. So yan, in accounting, more than just being uncollectible yung bad debt or doubtful accounts. They are actually loss in the form of expense. Okay? In the form of expense. Were you able to get it, guys? Kindly raise hand if nakuha yun. Okay. So now before I forget, the recognition of bad debt and doubtful account as an expense on the part of the entity is actually in connection with the accrual basis. If you can still remember the accrual basis of accounting, what is provided is income is earned regardless of when received, and expense is incurred regardless of when paid. Nare-remember pa yan? Kindly raise hand. Okay. Okay, so in connection of bad debt and doubtful account, if an accounts receivable is turned to be doubtful for collection, under accrual basis, we immediately recognize bad debts or doubtful accounts expense. Unlike in other method, because there are some method in presenting bad debt or doubtful accounts, that if an account or customer's account or accounts receivable becomes doubtful, hindi nagre-recognize ng expense the moment na naging doubtful yung accounts for collection. But under accrual basis, pag nagkaroon ng doubt pa lang, we immediately recognize an expense amount or a loss on the part of the entity. So yan lang example. Yan lang naisip kong meme. Diba? Si seller is trying to collect from the buyer, pero sabi lang ni buyer, utang. So yung may mga sari-sari store dyan, medyo makaka-relate. Okay? Diba? Parang ini-ignore na kayo ni customers nyo pag after nilang nakautang sa inyo. Pero kung nangungutang pa lang, my goodness, nangungusap ang mga mata para pautangin mo lang. But nonetheless, wala tayong magagawa. Yan eh. So in relation to accounts receivable, we recognize bad debts expense or doubtful accounts expense as part of the income statement. We normally debit doubtful accounts expense or bad debt expense kasi nga expense account siya. So normal balance niya, debit, part siya ng income statement. While allowance for bad debts or allowance for doubtful accounts, it is part of the balance sheet account as a contra asset account of the accounts receivable. Usually, accounts receivable yung meron yan. Then we credit the normal balance of allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts is credit. Kaya nga contra asset siya. Accounts receivable, debit, contra asset is credit. Yan. It's up to you if you're going to use bad debts or doubtful accounts expense. I just present it there because some references make use of bad debts, other references make use of doubtful accounts expense. Okay? So take note of that. When we arrive with the amount of bad debts or doubtful accounts expense, dalawa yung presentation niya actually. So that amount will be presented as part of the income statement as expense, then such amount will be accumulated into an allowance account as part of the balance sheet or statement of financial position. Okay? So to recognize bad debts or doubtful accounts, we either debit bad debt expense or doubtful accounts expense. Then we credit either allowance for bad debts or allowance for doubtful accounts. It is up to your reference as to what journal entry you are used to. But as far as I can remember, you are more acquainted with the term doubtful accounts. So maybe you are using doubtful accounts expense and allowance for doubtful accounts other than the first terminologies, yung bad debts. Okay? So yan yung ating recognition through journal entry. Then computation of the ending balance. Ayan. Allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts. On the credit side, we have the beginning balance, recoveries, and doubtful accounts expense. While on the debit side, we have the written off or the write-off. Then we have the required ending balance only for purposes of tawag nun, balancing out total debits and total credits. Always take note na yung required ending balance will be normal balance of credit. Nilagay lang natin siya sa debit to signify total debits and total credits. So yan. Now in comparison with accounts receivable, particularly on the recoveries, as you can see, we have recoveries on the credit side of the T account for bad debts or doubtful accounts, or the allowance account. Now, under accounts receivable, if you can still remember, we have presented two accounts. Either we include recoveries both on the debits and credit side of the accounts receivable T account, or exclude the amount of recoveries. Both have the same effect on the balance of the accounts receivable. But for purposes of allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts, it is low to no percentage of having a no effect, a no effect relationship on the presentation of recoveries. Kasi yung recoveries kasi sa accounts receivable, pag nilagay natin sa debit, tapos maglagay ulit tayo dun sa credit, if you can still remember yung T account, nazi-zero out yung effect, kaya no effect. The same goes if no presentation done to both debits and credits. But under allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts, always be mindful of the recoveries. Lalo na kung yung recoveries are referring to previous period write-off accounts. So, no effect ng recoveries will happen if the recoveries and write-off are at the same period. Example, if today, today is 2022, di ba? So kung ngayong 2022 nagkaroon tayo ng recoveries, nagkaroon tayo ng write-off, then out of those write-off nagkaroon din ng recoveries, pwedeng no effect siya sa T account ng bad debts or doubtful accounts. However, if the recoveries this 2022 refers to the written off accounts from 2021, then we cannot apply the no effect. Okay? The no effect on the T account of the doubtful accounts. Pero dun sa accounts receivable, pwede nating ma-apply yung no effect. What reason? Kasi nga, whether from previous period siya or for current period, pwede nating i-present or pwedeng hindi i-present yung recoveries sa debits and credits ng T account ng accounts receivable. So para makarelate kayo masyado sa pinagsasabi ko ngayon, go back later on doon sa T account ng accounts receivable. I have it in the discussion material actually. So kindly visit na lang. Okay? So, nagets ako guys. Kindly raise hand. Okay. Now, let's move on with the methods of computing bad debts or doubtful accounts. Reference and other materials also present for at least three methods. We have aging schedule, percentage of AR, and percentage of sales. Of all the three, commonly applied po sa aging schedule. Reason for that purpose is that aging schedule is more GAAP. Why more GAAP? Because it is, when we say GAAP, generally accepted accounting principle. GAAP siya, more GAAP siya because it is patterned under PFRS 9. Under PFRS 9 kasi for financial instrument, merong nakastate doon na simplified method. Okay? Simplified method, pointing out yung tinatawag na provision matrix. Yung example guys ng provision matrix is yung aging schedule. Okay? Aging schedule. Before, during our time ng undergrad, it was presented to us during review. Yeah, during review and also under formal review na under IFRS 9, example of a provision matrix is the aging schedule. So PFRS 9 is not actually emphasizing na provision matrix hindi pa nagagamit. Nagamit na yung provision matrix, example niyan is aging schedule. So later on we will apply the concept of aging schedule in a problem solving. So summary comparison ng tatlong method. Yan. On the nature of the approach, yung aging schedule at saka percentage of AR, both are balance sheet approach or statement of financial position approach. The reason for that, because in connection with the resulting amount, yung required and yung amounts kasi na nagre-result for the computations is the required allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts or yung ending balance. Okay? And also, when computing for the doubtful account, for the doubtful accounts, the basis of multiplying the uncollectibility rates, naka-base tayo dun sa accounts receivable, which is in fact both are balance sheet accounts. Accounts receivable, balance sheet, allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts, balance sheet din yan. So balance sheet approach talaga yung aging schedule and percentage of AR. But yung percentage of sales, income statement po siya, or profit or loss approach. Reason, kasi nga by the name itself pa lang, percentage of sales. Sales is an income statement or a profit or loss statement account. Okay? Then, on the basis of uncollectibility rates, when computing bad debts or doubtful accounts, both percentage of AR and percentage of sales, actually including si aging schedule, based on experience. Based on experience yung kanilang basis sa uncollectibility rates. Now, percentage of AR and percentage of sales based on average. When we say average, referring na sa kabuang accounts receivable. May kabuang receivables. But for aging schedule, yung average experience niya based on the age group. Age in days past due. So i-explain ko later yung age in days past due. More GAAP kasi sa aging schedule because it follows the analysis of age in days past due under IFRS 9. So yan. On the basis of multiplying uncollectibility rates, both aging schedule and percentage of sales nakabase sa accounts receivable. Yun nga lang si aging schedule, nakabase yung accounts receivable per age group. Okay? Per age group in days past due. Pero si percentage of AR nasa kabuang ending balance. So ibig sabihin yung difference ng dalawang method na yan, si aging schedule, yung accounts receivable, i-classify natin per group. Kung ilang days na siya past due. Pero si percentage of AR, wala na. Kabuang accounts receivable talaga yung ating gagawing base amount. While si percentage of sales naman, depende. It could either be the amount of sales or credit sales. Take note when we discussed the accounting for credit sales 1 year ago, kung maalala nyo pa, nakalagay doon sa discussion ko na sales could include cash sale, credit sale, and advance cash payment sale. So, of all the type of sale, of the three type of sale, common si accounts receivable related kay credit sale. So, in relation with doubtful accounts, be consistent lang tayo. So, i-relate din natin siya commonly sa credit sales. But if the problem so provides na total sales talaga, wag po tayong makipag-away sa problem. Sasabihin nyo, sabi kasi ni Sir Gabon, credit sales yon. So mali ang problem. Wow. Inaway mo pa ang problem. Wag ganon ha, wag ganon. Ano lang, uphold the concept but never argue with the problem. Unless the problem is really erroneous in the process. Not on the assumptions. Okay. The next to resulting amount, again, yung aging schedule and percentage of AR, yung magre-result is allowance for bad debts na both balance sheet accounts. Pero yung percentage of sales, bad debt expense. So expense agad. So income statement talaga. Okay? So yan yung summary comparisons. You can see the discussions for that comparison sa mga reference books. Yung ginawa ko na lang is to sum it up into a tabular form. Next, additional notes in relation to the three methods. For aging schedule of accounts receivable, yung tinatawag na age in days past due, which is a concept pattern under IFRS 9 or PFRS 9, age in days past due, it is the age in days of the accounts receivable counting after a specified collection period. So ibig sabihin, if the problem provides for a specific collection period, the accounts receivable is considered not yet due or not yet past due if the collection is still within or if the age of the accounts receivable is still within the collection period. But pag nag-lapse ng collection period, doon na magsa-start yung tinatawag na age in days past due. So for example, collection period is within 30 days. If the age of the accounts receivable from the start of arising that accounts receivable, so for example, today is January 4. Today, January 4, nagkaroon ako ng accounts receivable. If I have a collection period of 30 days, within 30 days, the accounts receivable is not yet past due. But starting kailan ba yung 31st day starting today? February 1, tama? Ellery Sand. Baka nakakamali lang ako. Ay, hindi February 5. 5 ba? 31 kasi yung Baka mali lang ako, guys. Ulit. 31 yung January. My goodness, nagkakalkyo talaga ako. Minus 4. 27 plus 3. February 4. Kailan yung ika-30th day starting today, guys? Tulungan niyo ako. I need help. Tama. February 3. So, February 3, ano ba? February 3. Bakit February 4 si Miss Mentes? Sige, manumanuhin ko na nga. Na-correction siya. February 3 daw. Sige, February 3. So, from January 4 today to February 3, 30 days pa rin yan. So, within that period, hindi pa past due yung aking accounts receivable. But, starting February 4, starting February 4, magiging past due na yung aking accounts receivable. So yun nga, example dyan, may 30 days collection period, tapos yung accounts receivable natin, hindi pa siya nako-collect talaga for 40 days na, for 40 days, ibig sabihin, starting the 31st day to the 40th day, 10 days past due na po yung accounts receivable natin. That is, if we're going to follow the age in days past due concept ng IFRS 9. Nagigets ako, guys? Kindly raise hand. Okay. So next, percentage of accounts receivable. Sa percentage of accounts receivable naman, the basis or the base amount that I am referring to earlier is referring to the ending balance of accounts receivable. Ending balance should mean the gross carrying amount still collectible. So therefore, talagang we need to master the T account of the accounts receivable when computing for the ending balance. Because what is stated there, gross carrying amount still collectible. Doon kasi sa T account ng accounts receivable, what was presented is, meron tayong collections, meron tayong credit memos, at saka meron tayong write-off. Collections, hindi na yan collectible kasi nga immediately collected na yan. Okay? Yung credit memos, hindi na rin collectible kasi nga considerable deduction because of valid reasons. Credit memos Then yung ano naman, yung write-off, isa pa si write-off. Kasi si write-off, worthless accounts na yan. Removed from the records. So yun yung for percentage of accounts receivable. Referring to ending balance, cross-carrying amount na still collectible. Then percentage of sales or credit sales, again, sales should mean credit sales or sales on account. From total sales, magbabawas ka ng cash sale at saka kung merong advance cash payment sale, kung meron. At usually naman cash sale and credit sale lang naman yung usual na sales natin. So yan. Pero kung sa problem talaga, naka-state na total sales lang, not specified if the sale is referring to cash or credit sale, do not argue with the problem. Follow lang sa problem. Okay? I'm not saying na it's absolute na ganon, but there are times talaga na wala lang, lilituhin ka lang ng problem. Okay? But please don't forget the concept kasi yan yung foundation. So sige, let us apply the concepts na lang as we go along with this problem. Nakikita guys yung problem? Visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. By the way, pasensya ha kung nakakarinig kayo ng sisiw. Nakakarinig ba kayo ng sisiw? Yan o.
Yes, sir.
May bagong pisa kasi dito. Diyos ko. Patandales, proceed tayo sa problem. Ayan. High-speed company reported total sales of 4 million. O take note, binigyan agad kayo. Total sales, 4 million. O, tignan muna yung other information before we argue much on the 4 million. So yan. Stay put si 4 million. 4 million total sale siya, hindi pa stated kung cash sale lahat or sale on account. Then, we're provided with the following balances. Accounts receivable and allowance for doubtful accounts, 700,000 and 50,000 respectively. Yung nakalagay, beginning. Now, other reference materials and other reference books, minsan yung nakalagay is unadjusted balance, lalo na kay allowance for doubtful accounts. Guys, kung unadjusted yung nakalagay, like allowance for doubtful accounts, comma, unadjusted, oftentimes it is referred to as the beginning balance. Okay? Beginning balance. Then we have recoveries from previously written off accounts. 10,000. Accounts written off during the year. Take note. The accounts written off is referring to the year. During the year. So 30,000. What are we going to consider only for purposes of computation of the ending balance of accounts receivable? Dapat si write-off yung sa current year. Hindi na yung write-off ng previous year. Okay? Then credit memos for freight cost and sales returns during the year, 15,000 and 25,000 respectively. The next paragraph, ito na yung thrill. Sales on account is 82.50% of the total sales. So by that alone, we can say na yung 4 million, hindi lang credit sales lahat. So magkano yung 82.50% ng 4 million? Sige, calculator warriors. Compute. O guys, magkano yung 82.5% of 4 million? Sino yung may calculators dyan? Tulungan niyo ako. Uy, si Miss Sandra May, tinanong ako, 3,300,000? May question mark talaga. $3,300,000. Sure na kayo, guys? Basta, niloloko mo ata kami. Oh, yes, sir. O, ganyan. Correct yan. So, correct. Yung 3,300,000. I hope everybody else were able to get 3,300,000. So, take note of 3,300,000 kasi yan yung ating maging basis later on. Hindi basis. Basis na rin. Basis na rin. Later on when we proceed with percentage of sales. Yan ha. So, sige. The company made collections of 3,700,000 including recoveries. So, yung 3,700,000 natin, kasama na daw dyan yung 10,000 recoveries. Then, out of 3,700,000, 700,000 daw cash sale. Okay? Cash sale. Goods have been delivered to customers who made advance cash payments within the year. So referring to advance cash payment sale. Sabi dyan na i-deliver na daw yung goods to customers. Therefore, yung advance cash payment sale natin, naging perfect sale na siya, pwede na siyang ma-convert immediately to a normal cash sale. Parang ganon. So yan, parang wala nang problema. So yan. So i-verify natin yung figures presented. Particularly on the 700,000 cash sale. Take note that when we have cash sale, Yung transaction dyan is to debit cash, ay yung journal entry rather. Yung journal entry sa transaction is to debit cash and credit sales revenue. Now, to determine that sales revenue is cash sale, dapat yung debit cash. Since may cash sale tayo, ibig sabihin, at the moment na nagkaroon ng sales revenue, we receive cash. Meaning, cash collection. Immediate cash collection. Sabi sa problem, the company made cash collections of 3,700,000. So, ibig sabihin, yung 700,000 kasama sa 3,700,000. Correct? So, how do we make sure na yung 4 million is correct? Now, kung 700,000 yung cash sale, let us verify kung yung difference ng credit sale at saka ng 4 million is 700,000 because that would indicate na yung difference that yun dapat yung cash sale. So magkano yung difference ng 4 million at 3,300,000 kanina? Okay. So 700,000. Sabi niyo 700,000. So we can verify na yung difference sa 700,000 is really the cash sale. Sino kayang gumawa ng problem na yan na parang tugma lahat? Sana all tugma. Okay. Then the analysis daw on the ending balance of accounts receivable is as follows. In relation to aging schedule, ito yung presentations natin. Meron tayong groupings, age in days past due. Then per age group, merong expected default rates per group. Then yung gross carrying amount daw ng ending balance ng accounts receivable on the basis of 100%, meron tayong 40% for 0 to 30, 30% to 31 to 60, 15% to 61, from 61 to 90, then 10% from 90 to 120, then 5% above 120 days. So kung magkano man yung ating ending balance under aging schedule, ika-classify daw as to age in days past due. Merong per groups. Okay? Pero kung percentage of accounts receivable, nako, hindi na tayo magkla-classify yan. So yung requirements sa atin, required allowance for doubtful accounts, ADA, doubtful accounts expense or DAE, then NRV or amortized cost for accounts receivable based on the following assumptions. So aging schedule, percentage of AR, tsaka percentage of sales. Sa percentage of AR, assuming daw 15% yung uncollectibility rate. Sa percentage of sales, 7% of credit sales. Take note yung sabi ha, 7% of credit sales. So since credit sales, so credit sales tayo mag-base. Pero kung sinabi dyan 7% of sales, do not argue with the problem. Kahit may credit sale na specified, mag-base pa rin tayo dun sa sales. Okay? Pero rest assured, common sa credit sale yung basis. Okay? So yan. See, kung mapapansin nyo, I will still refer dun sa summary comparison. Kung mapapansin nyo, maraming expected default rates kung gagamitin sa aging schedule. Pero si percentage of sales and percentage of accounts receivable, isa lang yung kanilang expected default rates. So I hope nagigets na yung summary comparison earlier. Sige, solve tayo starting aging schedule. Wait. Necessary computations nga pala muna. So ito yung computations natin kanina for the 3,300,000. If our computations kanina na 4 million versus 3,300,000, difference is cash sale, therefore correct na 4 million minus 700,000, yung 3,300,000 credit sales na. Or ganito yung ginawa natin kanina, yung isa, 82.5% of 4 million is really 3,300,000. Yan yung credit sales. Now to compute for the ending balance of accounts receivable, and ito yung T account. I hope you can still remember yung T accounts na present natin for accounts receivable. Yan. Sa debit side, may beginning balance, credit sales, tsaka recoveries. Okay, if we're going to post recoveries, kailangan yung recoveries included dito sa collections. Sabi naman dun sa problem, yung collections daw, cash collections, kasama na si recoveries. Pero question, sir, bakit 3 million? Saan nakuha si 3 million? Balikan ko yung problem for your reference. Saan nakuha yung 3 million? Sige, focus tayo dito sa last paragraph. O dito sa second paragraph pala. The company made cash collections of 3,700,000, meaning lahat na ng cash collections. From immediate cash collections up to credit collections. 700,000 daw cash sale. So saan nakuha si 3 million? So magkano, paano mo na-compute si 3 million? Okay. Correct. Cash collections na 3,700,000, bawasan lang ng 700,000 na cash sale. So therefore, the excess na 3 million, yun yung credit collections. From credit collections. Okay, balik tayo dito sa analysis. That's why 3 million yun nandito. This 3 million still includes the recoveries. Then bawas tayo ng credit memos, freight cost, and sales return. Then ibawas na rin si write-off. Kompleto si total debits. So total debits is 4,010,000. We assume the same amount to total credits. Then squeeze out. Kindly verify if it is correct of 940,000. Tama ba? 940,000. Please verify. Baka gino-joke ko lang kayo. Kindly raise hand if correct. Okay. So sa mga nag-raise hand, okay yan. Next. Proceed naman tayo sa baba. I-verify lang natin yung second T account kung correct yung analysis natin. We did not include any more the recoveries. Sa first T account, recoveries are included to both debit and credit side. Okay? Then, Sa second T account, no, mapapansin nyo, debit balance, wala ng 10,000 recoveries. Mapapansin naman dito sa credit side, yung collections without recoveries na yung description, and instead of 3 million, 2,990,000 na. Okay? So total debits, 4 million. Assume the same amount to total credits. Squeeze out, that should still equate to 940,000. Okay? That should still equate to 940,000. So yan yung ating necessary computations before we proceed with the three methods. So yan na, take note of that. So for aging schedule method, yung 940,000 natin, okay, we're going to classify it per age group based on the percentage base. 40% for 0 to 30 days is 376,000. 31 to 60 days is 282,000. 61 to 90 days is 141,000. 91 to 120 days is 94,000. And the rest is 47,000 for more than or above 120 days. Then, the amounts in column A, multiply it with the respective expected default rates or uncollectibility rates under column B. So 3%, 12%, 15%, 30%, and 75%. By the way, guys, some problems, they might present collectibility rates instead of default or uncollectibility rates. Pag ganon, simple lang yung computation ng default or uncollectibility rates. On a 100% base, ibawas lang si collectibility rates, yung magiging result na is uncollectibility rates. So, following this problem again, yung magiging result ng pag-multiply ng amounts sa column A with the percentages in column B, each figure will be referred to as the required allowance per age group. So for 0 to 30 days, 11,280. Then so on and so forth until more than 120 days, nakalagay 35,250. Respectively, per age group, yan yung kanilang required ending balance. Pero for FS presentation purposes, total required ending balance yung ating i-represent. That should equate to 129,720. Okay, 129,720. So I hope correct yung computations ko. Sige. Okay, so kindly verify na lang yung 129,720. Then yung column D referring to NRV per age group. NRV per age group. So sa 0 to 30 days, that would be 364,720. So on and so forth until more than 120 days, that would be 11,780 naman. Total niyan is 810,280. Assuming everything else is correct, computed correct, we can compute 810,280 by simply deducting from 940,000 the 129,720. That should still equate to 810,280. So we already have an answer for the requirement 1. That should be 129,720. For requirement 2, the doubtful accounts expense, using the T account, we're going to squeeze out the doubtful accounts expense. Kompleto na si total debits. Written off is 30,000 at saka yung required ending balance 129,720. Total debits will be 159,720. Assume the same amount to total credits. Bawas ka ng beginning, bawas ka ng recoveries. That should equate to 99,720. Okay, 99,720. Now, for purposes of journal entry, we debit doubtful accounts expense and credit allowance for doubtful accounts for the amount only of 99,720. Hindi yung ending balance na 129,720 yung i-represent na amount sa journal entry. Rather, the doubtful accounts expense na na-squeeze out natin. Then for requirement 3, the net realizable value, simply again the difference of 940,000 gross carrying amount and required allowance for doubtful accounts na 129,720. Then that would be 810 to 80. Nahabol? And raise hand if able to get it for aging schedule. Okay. So moving on with percentage of accounts receivable. For requirement 1, the required ADA, ending balance of accounts receivable, entire gross carrying amount of 940,000 multiplied by 15%. The required ADA is 141,000. So may sagot na tayo sa requirement 1. For requirement 2, allowance for doubtful accounts, post the ending balance temporarily sa debit side, 141,000, plus 30,000, total debits is 171,000. Assume the same amount, total credits, minus ka ng beginning and recoveries, that should equate to 111,000. So this 111,000, yun na yung ilalagay natin sa journal entry, debit doubtful accounts expense and credit allowance for doubtful accounts, 111,000. Then for requirement 3, ending balance, gross carrying amount of 940,000 less 141,000 required allowance, the net realizable value will be 799,000. Ang ingay talaga ng sisyo. Okay. So yan. So simple lang actually si percentage of accounts receivable. Okay. Also balance sheet account siya, balance sheet approach siya, but because aging schedule is more GAAP than percentage of accounts receivable, we follow mostly the aging schedule. So yan. Almost the same analysis yung computation sa requirements 2 and 3. The only difference is the computation under requirement 1. Then we proceed with percentage of credit sales or percentage of sales. Again, the assumption is based on credit sales. By the way, I'll make corrections pala on this one because the amount computed in requirement 1 should have been under the requirement 2. Then requirement 2, computed amount should be for requirement 1. Requirement 1 kasi is referring to required allowance, while requirement 2 is referring to doubtful accounts. Pero dito nagkabaliktad eh. Okay? For percentage of sales, if we're going to follow the format in the problem kanina, yung requirements, we cannot compute for the required ending balance if we're not going to compute first the doubtful accounts expense following percentage of sale assumption. So magko-correction na lang ako later ha. So yan. So credit sales na 3,300,000 yung kinompute nyo kanina, multiplied by uncollectibility rate na 7%. Yung result is doubtful accounts expense. Supposedly yan yung ating requirement 2. Okay, requirement 2 dapat yan. Then requirement 1, to compute for requirement 1, focus on the T account. Total debits, yun yung total credits rather. Total credits, yun yung magiging complete yung figures. 50,000 plus 10,000 plus 231,000 na dae. Total credits is 291,000. Assume the same amount to total debits. So minus 30,000, we can come up with required ending balance of 261,000. This time, what we have squeezed out was the required allowance, not the doubtful accounts expense amount. So yan. But for purposes of journal entry, we debit doubtful accounts expense and credit allowance for doubtful accounts 231,000. So yung na-compute natin na 231,000, yan yung i-represent sa journal entry. Then for requirement 3, consistent pa rin naman sa requirement 3, NRV. Ending balance of accounts receivable, 940,000. Bawas ng required allowance for doubtful accounts na 261,000 na na-squeeze out. So that would be 679,000. Yan. Okay? Not much complexity sa percentage of sales and percentage of AR. Yung advantage lang ng percentage of AR and percentage of sales kasi simple ang application. Pero disadvantage is less gap. Yung advantage naman ni aging schedule more gap siya. Disadvantage kasi handful kapag compute. Baka malito pa kasi nga per age group eh. Okay? Were you able to get it up to that point? Kindly raise hand. Okay. Moving on with our discussion. So yan yung application ng 3 methods. Then accounting for bad debts. Accounting naman for bad debts depends on the method used for FS presentation. Kanina yung computation, naka-base tayo sa 3 methods. This time, sa pag-present sa FS, 2 methods naman yung ating presentation. Pwedeng either direct method or allowance method. Between the two, mas common or mas gaap naman si allowance method. Okay, so let us assume the following amounts. Accounts receivable daw natin 940,000. Allowance for bad debts or the bad debts na na-compute is 129,720. Net realizable value is 810,280. Assume this problem or this assumption is an independent scenario. Okay? Do not relate it with the problems earlier. Ibang scenario to ha, ibang scenario. Okay, let's just assume these following figures. Now, comparison of direct method with allowance method. Pag tinanong tayo sa problem ng balance of accounts receivable, take note ha, balance of accounts receivable, yung magiging sagot natin under direct method is the net realizable value of 810,280. But under allowance method, the amount to be presented is 940,000. Okay? 940,000. What is the reason? Later on, i-relate natin yan sa subsequent particulars. Net realizable value of the accounts receivable, both direct method and allowance method will have the same amount. Because in fact, whether direct method or allowance method, based on computation, 810,280 is the net realizable value. Simply the difference of the allowance and the accounts receivable. Next, bad debt expense to be reported in income statement. Okay? Regardless of the timing of presentation of bad debt expense, still, both direct method and allowance method will present this figures of 129,720. Assuming bad debt expense natin is 129,720 na amount. However, for purposes of presenting allowance account, bad debts is sa income statement, the allowance naman sa balance sheet. Allowance method will present 129,720 pero si direct method 0. Okay? 0. Bakit kako 0? I-relate natin sa last two particulars, yung journal entries. Dito na yung much explanation ng direct method and allowance method differences. Bakit? Sa journal entry pa lang to record the bad debt expense, take note that under allowance method, it follows the accrual basis. That's why tinanong ko kayo kanina if you can still remember yung accrual basis. Kasi under allowance method, even if the accounts receivable is subject to doubt of collection, doubt pa lang ha, doubt, hindi pa worthless. Hindi pa tayo certain na hindi talaga babayaran. There's still a doubt. Kung baga, 50% collectible, 50% uncollectible. Bottom line, merong doubt for collections. Pag ganon, allowance method following the accrual basis, we already have a journal entry. Debit to bad debt expense or doubtful accounts expense, then credit allowance for bad debts or allowance for doubtful accounts. Okay? Meron tayong agad journal entry. Pero si direct method, kapag doubtful pa lang, wala pa tayo guys journal entry. No journal entry yet. Kapag doubtful. But upon ascertaining the worthlessness, meaning need na i-write off yung accounts receivable, then that's the time na magkakaroon na ng journal entry si direct method. That's a debit to bad debt expense or doubtful accounts expense, then credit accounts receivable directly. Kasi nga direct method. Okay? Kaya sinabi ko kanina, whether direct method or allowance method, merong bad debt expense yan. Pero may timing difference lang. Kasi yung timing difference nandyan sa recording. Nire-record natin ang debit sa bad debt expense kapag may doubtful na under allowance method. Pero walang journal entry under direct method. But for worthlessness or write-off, saka pa lang magre-record si direct method ng bad debt expense. Okay? Both direct method and allowance method may journal entry sa write-off. Magkaiba nga lang yung debits. Okay? Kasi yung debit ni allowance method is allowance for bad debts. Following yung kanyang journal entry sa debit ng bad debts and credit ng allowance for bad debts. Meaning, nire-remove na talaga from the record yung accounts receivable. Okay? But rest assured, sa mga problem solving, kailangan i-mention kung direct method. May mga hints for you to consider kung direct method yung given, ay yung assumption. Example, yung journal entry. Kapag sa journal entry nakalagay bad debt expense, debit, accounts receivable, credit, direct method yung assumption ng problem. Pero if the problem did not provide, always follow allowance method. Okay? Nagets ako? Any raise hand? I don't have any questions regarding computations. Kasi as far as I presented earlier, makukuha at makukuha nyo yung applications at saka yung concept as to computation using the three methods, yung aging schedule, percentage of AR, and percentage of sales. But accounting kasi is also more on presentation. So how do we present the bad debts? Okay, depende kung direct method or allowance method. So presentation, FS presentation also encompass the journal entries dun sa books. Okay? So I guess that's it. Move on tayo dito sa write-off. So write-off. So what is write-off? Write-off simply means removing the accounts receivable from the record due to worthlessness. Yan, worthlessness. Ibig sabihin, we are certain. Kung yung doubtful accounts, doubt pa lang, duda, worthlessness, wala na talaga. So what is the difference? Worthless, removing accounts receivable from records, while doubtful, setting up an allowance, we always assume allowance method. Unless direct method yung gamitin, hindi tayo magsiset up ng allowance. Si doubtful, hindi pa 100% na sure na na hindi mako-collect, pero si worthless, inaano natin, kino-consider na natin na 100% uncollectible. So, write-off na yan. Now, if a receivable is doubtful, yung journal entry natin, assuming allowance method, we debit bad debt expense or doubtful accounts expense and credit allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts kapag doubtful pa lang. Pero kapag worthless na or need na i-write off, allowance method debits allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts and credits receivables account. That is kapag allowance method yung ginagamit natin. Magkaiba yung journal entry sa doubtful at saka sa worthless accounts. Pero kapag direct method yung ginamit natin, worthless receivables will be debited to bad debt expense and directly credited to receivable account. Okay, it's up to you kung alin dito yung gagamitin nyo. Okay, bad debt expense or doubtful accounts expense. It's up to you. Depending on your preference. Basta under direct method, ganito yung journal entry natin. Therefore, direct method, sa direct method, wala na siyang analysis na doubtful at worthless. Si allowance method lang yung merong ganyang analysis na we're going to analyze if doubtful pa lang or if worthless na, saka pa lang tayo mag-remove ng accounts sa records. Pero kapag direct method, wala tayong pake kung doubtful pa lang kasi mag-record tayo ng expense kapag worthless or need na i-write off. Now question in relation to write-off of accounts. Yung question dyan, is it still possible to recover or collect a previously written off accounts receivable or receivable? As far as I remember, tinanong ko na ito sa inyo before. Question, yes or no? Okay. If I remember it correctly, yung term ko sa recovery is out of miracle na collection. Yun yung term na ginamit ko ata 1 year ago. So to answer the question, that is correct? Yes. There's still a hope of collection even if na write-off na yan. Okay? Simple reason. Nagiging natural na lang sa pinag-utang sa may utang sa atin na magbayad. Okay? So kung matagal na, naging natural na lang na obligation ng isang nangutang na magbayad siya kapag lagpas na ng agreed collection. Yeah, agreed collection date. So yan, yes. Now if yes, how do we account for the recovery of previously written off accounts receivable? So ganito yung accounting natin for recoveries. From being a write-off, yung gagawin natin kanina sa write-off, yung ginawa natin, balikan ko lang ha, yung ginawa natin sa write-off assuming allowance method, we debit allowance and credit receivable account. So yan yung write-off. Pero kapag nagkaroon na tayo ng recovery, yung gagawin natin is simply reverse the journal entry made for the specific amount recovered. So first, reestablish the receivable by debiting the receivable account and crediting the allowance for bad debts. Then second, took effect now the collections. Debit tayo ng cash and credit tayo ng receivables. Now, by that presentation, how will you explain, shortly explain the concept ng no effect ng recovery sa accounts receivable? Kanina, di ba kanina, 2T accounts yung ginawa natin, either present si recoveries or hindi, no effect pa rin siya sa receivable sa accounts receivable account, T account. So ano yung reason? Ano yung short explanation natin bakit no effect siya sa accounts receivable? Sabi ni Miss Kyla, nullify the written off entry. Hindi ako sure. Tinatanong rin niya ako. May question mark eh. Nullify the written off entry. Pwede. But based dyan sa ating journal entry na ginawa, journal entries natin ginawa for reestablishment and effect of collection. Ano kaya yung magiging reason bakit no effect siya sa T account ng accounts receivable or ng receivable account? Anyone na pwede mag-try? Naku guys, kung ahas yan, tinuklaw na kayo. Siguro nahihiya lang kayo. Alam ko yung naiisip nyo, tama yan, nahihiya lang kayong sabihin. Ayan, may nakakuha, correct. So sabi ni Miss Alina, the receivable was debited then credited. That is correct. That is correct. Nagiging no effect siya sa receivable account because we debit receivable then subsequently credit it through collection. That's correct. Actually, yung recoveries, other presentation sa books, hindi ko na emphasize sa morning kanina. Yung journal entry for recoveries is simply debit ng cash and credit na lang ng allowance for bad debts. Kasi kung titignan nyo, tama naman na mai-eliminate talaga yung effect niya because of a debit and simultaneous credit. So nawawala yung effect. So sa recovery, pwedeng ganito yung gawin nyo or pwede rin mag-debit kayo immediately sa cash and credit allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts. Kaya sinabi ko sa inyo kanina, in relation to doubtful accounts, allowance for doubtful accounts, na low to no effect siya. Okay? Low to no percentage yung kanyang effect sa T account ng allowance for bad debts because nga, depende yung recovery kung kailan. And kailan din yung related write-off niya. Kasi kung yung write-off at saka yung recovery within the same year, pwedeng no effect siya sa T-account ng allowance. Pero kung magkaibang period, sabihin natin again, yung write-off nasa 2021, tapos yung recovery is relating sa 2021 pero na-recover siya sa 2022, syempre sa 2022 tayo magkakaroon ng journal entry, hindi natin sasabihin na no effect yan sa T-account. Kasi kung mapapansin, mai-eliminate si receivable pero si allowance for bad debts hindi mai-eliminate sa journal entry ng current period. Kaya nga kanina, yung written off accounts or yung accounts written off, in-emphasize ko na for the year. Kasi hindi pwede na magkukompute ka this year pero mag-consider ka ng amounts ng write-off sa last year. Yung write-off sa last year yan. Pero yung write-off sa current year lang yan. Okay? Na-gets ako? Kindly raise hand. Okay, sige. We'll apply this in a sample problem. So sample problem 1, January 31, 2020. INTACC1 company ascertained that 5,000 worth of accounts receivable from customer A is worthless and need to be written off. Pagka February 28, 2020, so the same year, due to regaining the ability to pay, customer A decided to pay the full amount of 5,000. So requirements natin, journal entries. Since the same year siya, we can say na pwedeng no effect siya sa T-account. But yung purpose ko sa problem na to is to present kung paano nire-record yung write-off and recovery. So yung journal entry natin sa January 31 will simply a debit to allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts and credit accounts receivable following allowance method. Pero under February 28, since full amount yung recovery, i-reverse lang natin yung journal entry sa January 31. Debit tayo ng accounts receivable and credit allowance for bad debt or doubtful accounts ng 5,000 kasi lahat naman daw na recover. Then took effect the collection, debit tayo ng cash and credit tayo ng accounts receivable. Okay? So ganito yung presentation natin sa journal entries. Just to be safe, always take note of this process. Wait lang guys for a while. Okay, going back. Ayan. So ito yung sample problem 1 natin. So take note in this problem, yung recovery is full recovery. ng 5,000. Now, the question is, what if, sir, yung recovery is like, sabi natin, portion lang ng na-write off. Sabihin natin out of 5,000, yung na-collect lang is like 3,000, 2,000, ganon. Do we still took effect the recovery? Yes na yes. Let us have this problem. On March 31, 2020, INTACC1 company ascertained that 7,000 worth of accounts receivable from customer B is worthless and need to be written off. So almost the same scenario kanina. However, on April 30, customer B decided to pay but could only settle 4,000 as of the moment. So tinatanong tayo ng journal entries sa March 31 and April 30. In contrast with the previous problem, dito sa problem 2, sample problem 2, sabi niya, 4,000 lang yung kayang bayaran as of the moment. Kapag ganyan, we cannot argue with the problem. Kasi recoveries is, yun nga, sabi ko, out of a miracle na nga yung recoveries eh. So kung nagbayad siya ng 4,000, then accept 4,000. So yung magiging journal entry natin dyan, for March 31, debit ka ng allowance for bad debts or doubtful accounts following the allowance method. Then credit tayo ng accounts receivable for the entire amount, of course, of 7,000. But for the recoveries, we simply reverse the journal entry but for only 4,000. So accounts receivable debit and credit allowance for doubtful accounts or bad debts, 4,000 lang. Hindi entire amount na 7,000. Okay? Hindi entire amount na 7,000 kasi 4,000 lang yung na-recover as of April 30. Malay natin, subsequent pa yung excess, yung 3,000, subsequent pa ma-recover. Okay? Basta yung scenario, as of April 30, 4,000 lang yung na-collect. Then yung collection naman, debit tayo ng cash and credit tayo ng accounts receivable for the same amount of 4,000 na recovery. Okay? So were you able to get it? Kindly raise hand. So yan. Yan yung application ng ating bad debts, write-off, and recovery. Yan. Yung kinalimutan na talaga nila yung utang nila sa'yo. Be like, malas ka. Di ba? Yung mga inutangan dyan, hindi na nagbayad sa inyo. Ako, kawawa kayo. Parang ganito na yung mukha nyo. Write off na lang agad. Naawa ko sa mukha ni nasa Alaska. Hindi na Alaska, malas ka. So that concludes our discussion for bad debts or doubtful accounts.